A 1-2 punch in the Atlantic as we track two tropical disturbances, one of which is showing way more signs for organizing into what could be Tropical Storm Elsa. A live breakdown of these two systems and a live meteorologist Q&A coming up here on Tracking the Tropics. Hey there, folks. JB Buno here with you live once again in your hurricane headquarters. Dual tropical disturbances here in the Atlantic, and so we have a packed panel here for you today to get to the latest questions that you have here in the Facebook Live comment section. We have Fox 16 Chief Meteorologist Jeff Baskin joining us from Little Rock, Arkansas there in the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. We also have WFLA meteorologist Rebecca Barry. They are standing by to take your questions. We're going to start looking now here in the Facebook Live comment section for the hashtags Hey Jeff, hashtag Hey Rebecca, and hashtag Hey Ian. Ian at the wall to track both Invests 95 and 97L, and 97, Ian, is the one we're really keeping our eye on.
JB, good afternoon. Yeah, a couple areas that we're watching out in the Atlantic. If you're watching from the Tampa Bay area, it probably feels like we've been hit by a tropical storm a couple days in a row now with storms ongoing, just tropical moisture above us. But as we look towards the Lesser Antilles and then farther out into the Atlantic, that's where we're tracking two disturbances. One, a tropical wave that's now moving through the Lesser Antilles, and another one about 13 miles off to the east from there. But quickly, I want to just bring you up to speed with where we're at in the hurricane season. Since we last spoke, we had another tropical storm, our fourth named storm of the season. That was a brief tropical storm called Danny, developed off the coast of South Carolina, moved onshore with some gusty winds and some locally heavy rainfall. But thankfully, that was about as low impact as it gets with a tropical system. Another name off the list. We've got four down now. Of course, the forecast was always for a well above average season. We're well on our way. We could have our fifth named storm as we move on through the next few days, but typically we don't have four named storms until the end of August. So we're running about 2 months now ahead of schedule as far as how many named storms that we've had, and then we'll look to see the possibility of when we'll get our first hurricane this season. So this is new information, brand new, just came out from the National Hurricane Center. This tropical wave, that's 95L, they bumped that down to near 0% chance of tropical development. It's disorganized. Essentially, it's just a cluster of showers and thunderstorms that's rolling through the island, bringing some disturbed weather. Most of that will wrap up as we head into the overnight hours tonight, though. Much farther off to the east, about 1,300 miles, is another tropical wave that's actually helped to spawn a broad area of low pressure. Satellite passes haven't found a well-defined center of circulation, but once that exists, it'll technically qualify it as a tropical system, and it'll either be Tropical Depression 5 or it'll get the name Elsa once it reaches tropical storm status. And you see that's a likelihood now over the next 5 days. NHC has bumped that up to a 90% chance of tropical development. Could even happen in the next two with that 2-day development chance. Now it's 70%. So this is 95L. These are the Lesser Antilles, Windward Islands up into the Leeward Islands. Disturbed weather for sure, some tall thunderstorms that we can track for you with infrared satellite. But it's this area that we're going to have to watch much more closely. That one we're not particularly concerned about at all. This one definitely bears watching. You can see that broad area of low pressure, the swirl that's being detected in the satellite picture here. That's moving pretty quickly off to the west and northwest. And this is our spaghetti plots by the end of the week, taking it to essentially where 95L is right now. And then once we go beyond that, we do start to see a bigger spread among these forecast models. And Jeff, we expect this. It's a storm that hasn't developed yet. It's 1,300 miles off to the east of the Lesser Antilles. So yeah, there's a good deal of uncertainty long-term with this.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about this system is the timing of it and where it is. This is very early in the season. We're only in late June, not even in July yet. And if you look at the climatology, early July, you've very, very few storms that develop that far out in the Atlantic Ocean. Usually conditions just aren't very favorable at this point in the year. So this looks like a scenario that we'd be looking at more like in August or September with one of these Cape Verde type storms and moving across the Atlantic with the potential for development as it heads towards the Caribbean. And then this track suggested by a lot of the ensemble members, again, looks like something that we would see typically later on during the season where you have that well-established area of high pressure. And that could, if this develops, take that system farther west, possibly into the Gulf of Mexico. But again, that's a big if.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk a little bit more about is that, yeah, I talked about how already we're running about 2 months ahead of schedule as far as the timing of our named storms, having 4 already. But yeah, this isn't a spot that we typically look this time of the year for tropical development, that main development region, the MDR, from the Lesser Antilles all the way back to the coast of Africa. That's a later in the season thing, peak season, August, September, when we see about 2/3 of our tropical systems occurring. In June, we're typically looking for warm sea surface temperatures, disturbances over them that can help spawn them into tropical systems. So yeah, just off to our west out in the Gulf of Mexico, we've got sea surface temperatures at our beaches already in the upper 80s, but the bulk of the Gulf of Mexico, low into mid 80s. This is a breeding ground, ripe conditions for tropical development. That's typically not the case in the main development region at this point. And also, this essentially right here, this region, the northeastern part of the Caribbean, is where tropical systems go to die this time of the year. Lots of wind shear to help disrupt those circulations. It's unusual to see this moving as it is. Essentially, what we expect to happen is what's happening right now with Invest 95L. It's very sloppy and disorganized and eventually kind of falls apart. That's what we expect to see this time of the year. But again, once you get into August and then especially into September, you get into the main development region, tropical waves emerging off the coast of Africa. That's essentially where we get the bulk of our tropical system. So very much an early signature here with a couple of systems out in the main development region. And we wouldn't expect to see that latter portion of June. We would expect to see that in a month, maybe 2 months from now. Of course, wanted to show you this real quick. This is Max Defender Radar, S-band radar here in Tampa Bay, which is absolutely lit up. And this is a perfect example of what tropical moisture does, generates very heavy downpours, gusty winds. We had a lot of lightning yesterday, and we've got a good coverage of storms ongoing across the Tampa Bay area once again. S-band helps us see through some of this tropical moisture and give us a great resolution of these storms, especially at range. Rebecca, you and I were both using this yesterday. It was a busy afternoon. Looks like we got another one.
Absolutely, and I'm a little hopeful that because the storms did fire up a little earlier this afternoon that we might get a drier evening because the rain just lingered last night and barely dried out. And we have, of course, a big game in town tonight with the Bolts. And so I'm hoping that everyone gets good weather by the time puck drop rolls around at 8. And so the earlier arrival time is helpful in that sense. And so I've got my fingers crossed for better weather, of course. And Max Defender 8 showing that first initial line of storms and then seeing through those storms to that second round in Hardee and DeSoto counties there, where we can track that lightning as well as those heavy downpours. We've caught up on our rainfall deficit over the past couple of days. It's either feast or famine here in terms of rainfall. We were pretty dry in the spring, and now we are looking at a surplus for rain in a lot of locations. And sometimes it takes a tropical system to catch us up. We get one of those weak tropical storms that just brings us a lot of rain. Sometimes that can pull us out of the spring drought, but that was not needed this year. The moisture was enough for us, and so right now we are, of course, talking the tropics, and so we're looking at probably the next system out there in the Atlantic, and it would take the name Elsa, which I know a lot of Disney fans are excited about.
Yeah,
Anna already.
Man, it had to be Elsa for this one that's showing real signs of potentially organizing here. I mean, we were talking in our preseason episode about how Elsa, we just had bad vibes regarding Elsa. Good vibes here with our panel of meteorologists. Jeff Baskin joining us from Little Rock, Fox 16 chief meteorologist there in Arkansas, Rebecca Barry joining us, and Ian Oliver now back with us here sitting down in your hurricane headquarters. We're going to start taking your questions here from the Facebook Live comment section. Use the hashtags that we have here on your screen in the Facebook Live comment section, and we can feature your comments here as we talk about 95L, 97L especially, and just any questions you have regarding the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season. We're going to start here with Nick in the Facebook Live comment section. Hashtag, hey, Ian, let's get this started. Should I go stock up on toilet paper? And
Nick, you're too late. It's all gone.
It's all gone.
It should have stocked up 6 to 12 months ago.
Pandemic PTSD right there as far as not being able to find toilet paper. But to Nick's question, though, and maybe Jeff, if you want to weigh in here, could this be one of the bigger first storms or early season storms that we have here as far as looking at 97L?
Well, it certainly has more potential than a lot of the other systems, the other 4 that developed, because they developed pretty far north and rather close to land. So they never really had much opportunity to intensify. They never really had any chance of becoming a hurricane. But this one's a little bit different because despite the climatologically unfavorable time of year for it, it is moving over some relatively warm water. Wind shear isn't going to be necessarily prohibitively high, but it could still be an issue for development. But one thing to note about this storm 97L is that it's following in the footsteps of 95L, that other disturbance that we're not really worried about developing. But what that system did was it helped to moisten up the atmosphere a little bit. And so now 97L is going to be able to take advantage of that. And that gives it a bit more of a chance for development. And if it does wind up making it into the Caribbean, especially the Western Caribbean, it's going to be moving into a more favorable area, warm waters, lower wind shear, and there is going to be the potential for this to become the first hurricane of the season. And actually, a lot of the computer guidance indicates some significant strengthening. Again, the guidance is all over the place as far as intensity, but some of the guidance is indicating that this could become a hurricane down the road. That's not to say that's definitely going to happen, but there is that potential, unlike the first few storms we've had this season.
Yeah, and we're seeing our Facebook Live. We just saw our Facebook Live comment section light up here on Tracking the Tropics with a lot of great questions pertaining to could this be, as Jeff just noted, the first hurricane of the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season. Also asking us questions, a great question pertaining to South Florida here from Ramon we're going to get to here in just a second. But the questions that we're seeing most right now, I'm going to throw this over to both Ian and Rebecca, from Heather here, #HJB, when should it be near Florida? And then Sarah here also asking #HJB, what dates could this be close to Florida if they form? So, guys, a lot of timeline questions coming in here.
I think that makes sense because the weekend is a special weekend. It's a holiday weekend.
It is.
I would say at this point, it would be generally about a week from now or never.
Hopefully
that's
never. I was going to go with never, but it looks like it would be at least a week.
Yeah, so this is not something that's going to mess up your holiday weekend, even your long holiday weekend. It would be towards the middle part of next week. We're looking at least a week out at this point.
Thursday-ish.
Huge spread among forecast models, what the strength's going to be like, but also where it's going to be. There are forecast models. You saw that in the spaghetti plots. I'll see if I can get that pulled back up for you.
And you're right on cue because Mindy Bryant just chimed in here, #Hey Ian, can we see the spaghetti model again? So
Mindy,
Ian,
you absolutely can. Let's roll right back to it, JB. Yes, we've got forecast model solutions that take this well off the east coast of Florida, the Bahamas. We've got some taking it towards the Yucatan Peninsula. And this is the point of the show where we have to caution you against crazy social media, because run to run with these forecast models, which is just a single run of a forecast model. It's not an ensemble. It's not a forecast. So a forecast model is not a forecast. It's a single thought in time. You're going to see some scary forecast models with this probably. And I would also caution you, if you look at 95L, which NHC just bumped down to a bagel at this point, and they're not concerned about it at all. Just a couple days ago on social media, there was a lot of images going around of that one that looked quite scary. So this is not one that's going to sneak up on us. It's 1,300 miles east of the Lesser Antilles. It's way out in the Atlantic. We'll have a much better and clearer picture of what this is going to look like and where it's heading in the days to come.
And with the forecast models, it doesn't have that defined center of rotation yet. Once we get that, forecast models get a lot more accurate. And so as the system develops or doesn't, because it is booking it, it's moving at about 20 to 25 miles per hour. It's hard for systems to develop when they're moving that fast. And so it would have to slow down a little bit for us to see any significant organization, most likely. And the other thing that we were talking shop about is the main forecast model that a lot of people like right now is the GFS, and it brings it right over Puerto Rico and right over Cuba. And we know that that's not going to happen. It's not going to survive that much land interaction, especially with that mountainous terrain. And so sometimes when you watch a forecast model, you go, well, that's not going to happen. And I think this is one of those where it brings it right over Cuba and right over Puerto Rico, but still somehow keeps it a little bit more organized than I would anticipate if it were to have that kind of land interaction.
A great comment coming in here from Regina that we're going to get to here out of the Facebook Live comment section. Again, for those of you just joining us, we're in our live meteorology Q&A section here, our live meteorologist Q&A section of Tracking the Tropics. So you can use any of the hashtags that you see in the corners of your screen underneath our names, and we will answer your question live, or at least do our best to get to as many questions on this edition of Tracking the Tropics. Ramon, for you here, Jeff, #Hey Jeff, any chance these storms impact us here in Little Rock? Of course, Jeff Baskin, chief meteorologist at Fox 16, joining us from Little Rock, Arkansas.
Well, that would be a long shot. The only way that that would happen would be if the storm system moves into the Caribbean and doesn't take much of a turn towards the north initially, as indicated by a lot of the guidance. But if that Bermuda high is stronger than what is indicated by the majority of the guidance right now, that could take the system into the Gulf of Mexico. And if it does come towards the central Gulf of Mexico, then that's something that we would need to be concerned about in Arkansas. But right now, that doesn't look like a high probability situation. That's something so far out that it's hard to be concerned about that right now. If we start to get closer and there's more indication that this system could eventually wind up in the central Gulf of Mexico and take that turn north into the southeast, then that would be something that would be concerned about. But right now, it just looks like it's too far away and too uncertain to have really any sort of concern for Arkansas at this point.
Another great question coming here, or another regional question here, but one that hits us a little bit different here as far as the state of Florida. Regina Thompson, #HJB, will this impede in the search and rescue in the condo collapse? Of course, talking about that terrible condominium collapse in South Florida near Miami. Guys, as far as the timeline here, they are, of course, continuing their search and rescue efforts there in South Florida, but this is some time before we would see a storm impact that area of the country, right?
Quite a bit of time, and so we're looking at well over a week. If you watch the timestamp there, it's talking about potentially being near Cuba on the 5th. So, and then by the time Thursday rolls around, potentially being either in the Gulf or the Atlantic, and so it's just too soon to tell. But timing-wise, if it forms and if it survives this long, it would be near the end of next week.
Let's get to the next question, and it's for Ian Oliver. Bobby Shehorn here, #Hey Ian. Is Invest 97L going to turn into a hurricane? We'll throw all of us up here on screen here as we look here at infrared satellite. And could it be, what are the likelihood, Ian, that we'll kind of jump off of that question from Bobby here. What's the likelihood that we have a Hurricane Elsa here in the days ahead?
As Jeff mentioned earlier, this is our best shot at our first hurricane of the season, no question. I mean, it's a young season so far. We're not even, I guess we're finishing up our first month of the season today. We've had 4 pretty inconsequential systems. I guess Claudette was actually a consequential system, but as far as Danny, that was a week, and then we had 2 systems that stayed off the East Coast. This has a very, very good chance. You saw a 90% chance of developing into either a tropical depression or a tropical storm. This is likely going to be, it's almost a lock to become our 5th named storm of the season. You look at it on infrared right now, that looks pretty good. It looks a whole lot better than it did yesterday. You're starting to see that circulation. It's broad still at this point, but once that tightens up and we can determine that either by satellite, or I'm sure it won't be too much longer before this ends up having some investigation flights into it by the hurricane hunters. Once that forms, we'll get a much better look, as you were talking about, Rebecca, the structure of the system. Once forecast models get that little peak, once it's been sampled, they start getting a whole lot more accurate. So at this point in the game, no well-defined center. We don't know exactly what the structure of the storm is. You expect to see big-time spread among the forecast models. The question is it going to become our first hurricane of the season? I would say we likely have a pretty good shot at that. We'll have to see what happens over the next couple of days. If it's in good shape, as far as a good-looking tropical storm by the end of this week, we probably get a good chance of that happening over the weekend, Rebecca.
I would say that's fair. I think that's a really good analysis. Unfortunately, it is kind of an early start to the season, but we're used to that after the last couple of seasons, and we did have those more inconsequential storms that Ian was just mentioning, whether they were fish storms or just very weak. Unfortunately, this one looks like it could be different, and that's one of the reasons that we're paying a little bit more extra attention to it. But the forecast models are just not good enough this far out to tell you, hey, this is what's going to happen and this is where it's going. And the good news is we do have plenty of time to watch this. That's the only thing I like about Cape Verde storms is that you have days and days and days to watch and potentially prepare if you end up needing to.
We have a lot more questions to get to here in the Facebook Live comment section, but this is the last call here as I monitor the Facebook Live comment section with our team here at WFLA in your hurricane headquarters here on Tracking the Tropics. So if you would like to ask a question, our last call for those questions using hashtag Hey Jeff, hashtag Hey Rebecca, hashtag Hey Ian, or hashtag Hey JB. I'm going to throw this hashtag Hey JB question over Jeff's way because he's closest to Louisiana. Tony here saying hashtag Hey JB, want to bet money that this storm hits Louisiana, and we were talking a little earlier about some PTSD. I'm sure that
It's a bad bet. It is.
Yeah, Louisiana had a really rough go of it, Jeff, in 2020 as far as the 2020 hurricane season. So watching this one closely, of course.
Well, yeah, if this was 2020, I think you'd put pretty good odds on whatever this turns into coming into Louisiana, or at least the central Gulf Coast. But right now, it looks highly questionable because it doesn't appear as though that Bermuda High is going to be quite strong enough to keep the system far enough south to push it into the central or western Gulf of Mexico. It's not to say that it can't happen, but right now that appears less likely that it would happen than more likely. The more likely scenario is that it turns north a little bit quicker and maybe goes on the Atlantic side rather than goes into the Gulf side. But again, there's a lot of factors that go into that, how strong it is, when it actually finally develops. You can see the one system that we're watching now already moving into the Caribbean. That's not the one that we're really concerned about, though. That's the one that we're watching right there, 97L. And yeah, it is becoming quite a bit better organized, although that circulation still elongated east to west. It's still kind of embedded in what we call that monsoon trough along the intertropical convergence zone. But once it separates from that, if that area of low pressure is well defined enough, it will develop, and it is going to move over a area of warm water and possibly some lower wind shear. But this system has several things going against it right now. I don't want to count this out, but one of those things, of course, is the time of year. Climatologically, just not all that likely. Just because something's climatologically unlikely, though, doesn't mean it can't happen. Seattle getting up to 100 degrees 3 days in a row, extremely climatologically unlikely, but it did happen. The other thing going against it is on the path suggested by a lot of the early computer guidance. There's a lot of land in the way. You got Haiti, Dominican Republic, you got Cuba. So that could interfere with the circulation. You know, if it doesn't become well organized enough and it moves over some rough terrain, circulation could just kind of fall apart. And that's actually what's been indicated by the last couple of runs of the European model. Again, not going to count on that happening because a lot of the guidance does show this maintaining its strength or getting stronger as it moves into the Caribbean or possibly the Gulf or even turning up into the Atlantic. So certainly something to watch. Again, it's so far away, I wouldn't be too concerned about it right now along the U.S. coast, but it's just something to pay attention to in case it becomes a threat down the road.
I think Jeff can see into the future because I had the next question in the queue from Brittany, #AJB. What would cause it to fall apart? And I'll just bring in our whole team here and echoing Jeff's comments there. Ian, Rebecca, the number one thing that could break this apart would be?
Wind shear at this point, from a climatological standpoint, as Jeff was saying. This is not the time of the year that we expect the northeastern part of the Caribbean to be right, but it's not. But again, these are not rules, they're guidelines essentially. And as Jeff was saying, the heat in the Pacific Northwest, so unlikely, it's happening and continues.
It seems crazy when you look at the numbers that they're seeing with the heat. And so the sea surface temperatures aren't exactly where they need to be, but they're close. Mm-hmm. They're close enough. And then, of course, early on, you look for shear to potentially tear it apart or at least keep it weak. And then later on, of course, any interaction with mountainous terrain is going to really tear those storms apart.
I was looking at a suite of forecast models, and it did have the wind shear picking up day 4, day 5. Essentially when it would be making its trek into the models believe there should be some wind shear there. So that'll be interesting to see what happens for sure long term with this, what it looks like come the weekend and where forecast models have it going at that point.
Just a couple more questions here, everybody, but this is a big one that I've seen here with and without hashtags. Linda Polish here, #Hey Ian, will it mess up my 4th of July?
Which Facebook did this one come from, JB?
I think this is from WFLA's here in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, Boom by the Bay is back this year. Of course, there's like huge excitement about the 4th of July this year, of course, after what we went through last year, all the celebrations canceled. Boom by the Bay is back. Quickly, this is a show about the tropics, but locally, I want to point this out, we've been dealing with a monsoon of our own over the last few days. We're dealing with it right now. We showed you max defender rate. Our weather pattern does change for the weekend, thankfully. Wind direction goes the other direction. West wind off the Gulf of Mexico. Instead of pushing all those storms towards us, it should be pushing them towards the opposite coast. So we're not making any friends if anybody's watching from the Atlantic coast of Florida, but for us, there are still rain chances there. I think they'll be earlier in the day. By the time we get towards fireworks time, most of that stuff should be off to our east.
I'll throw this last one here both to Jeff and Rebecca here. Maria is joining us, and very simple comment. Hashtag HeyJB, a bit nervous. We might have one or two that just came in here, but we're going to just talk to Maria here. Are the nerves warranted here, Jeff and Rebecca?
I'd say after the last couple of hurricane seasons, I certainly understand that, why I'd be nervous anytime there's something out there. But, that's one of the good reasons to always be prepared when it comes to hurricane season. Just have your plans ready so you're not really trying to figure out what you're going to do at the last minute. You already know. So if something happens, you're not stressed about trying to come together with some sort of plan. So just have that in mind. Make sure that you have your supplies, because a hurricane can really hit at any time during the season. And sometimes you really don't get much warning at all, because they can develop very, very quickly, as we've seen a couple of storms go through rapid intensification. So sometimes you don't even know about a system, say 3 or 4 days out. You might, there just really isn't anything there. So you really don't, you don't know. So that is why you want to be prepared, have your plan together, know what you're going to do, but don't be scared about it, because tropical weather is a fact of life along most of the Gulf Coast, Florida, as well as the Atlantic coast. So if you're prepared for it, if you're ready for it, then I think that does a lot to ease those nerves. But right now, I'd say be prepared, but don't be nervous.
Preparation lowers anxiety for sure. And we take storm season one day at a time. And this is way too soon to get really nervous. But just like Jeff just said, anytime you can just have a basic idea of where you're going or how you're going to handle it if a storm does head your way, that's going to help you feel a lot better. But one day at a time for storm season.
We'll sneak in this one last comment here from Michael from WJHL's Facebook page in Tennessee. Hashtag AJB or hashtag Rebecca. Is Florida going to get hit head on? I'll throw this one over to you, Rebecca.
Highly unlikely at this point to say that we're going to get hit head on. And so there's a lot of islands in between us and them that could tear it apart. The forecast models do generally bring it in the direction of Florida, but the Bermuda High looks like it's just so weak. It's too soon to tell with the hurricane forecast models exactly where the system is going to head. It's just too early in the process. Once we get that center of rotation, once it becomes more defined, we'll get a better idea. And we'll also see how much interaction with land it's going to have in between us and that system, if it even makes it that far, because just like Ian said, we've got some shear to deal with ramping up on day 4 and day 5 that could keep this weak or tear it apart. And then we've also got land masses in between, of course, the storm and the U.S.
Big thanks to Chief Meteorologist at Fox 16, Jeff Baskin, joining us there. Bottom right-hand portion of your screen. We cannot let Jeff go, however, just because of what's going on right now in Tampa Bay with the Stanley Cup Final. We have the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Montreal Canadiens. Our coverage for Game 2 kicks off tonight, our road to the Cup coverage. So, yeah, Jeff, we're going to ask you to put on your hockey hat here for a second. I don't even know if you're a hockey fan, but your thoughts on the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Montreal Canadiens. Tampa Bay Lightning, of course, beloved, and a bit of a weather pun there I think we could make as far as their association with weather.
I think I'm going to go with the Tampa Bay Lightning on this one. I'm certainly not a hockey expert, but
smart.
I think that might be a good call for right here.
Jeff Baskin joining us, everybody from Fox 16, and a good call.
Three people on the stream wearing Bolts blue, and that's probably the right answer.
We would have had to have talked to Jeff for another 5 minutes or so on the stream here had he picked the Montreal Canadiens. Everybody, our road to the Cup coverage tonight here on WFLA Now. We're really looking forward to it, and really so glad to, again, have Fox 16 Chief Meteorologist Jeff Baskin joining us from Little Rock, Arkansas. For meteorologists Rebecca Barry and Ian Oliver, I'm JB Buno. Wednesdays, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central is when we're live here in your hurricane headquarters on Tracking the Tropics. If we do have a significant development here in the days ahead, however, regarding Invest 97L, the one that we're really closely monitoring, we'll be here with you live in your hurricane headquarters to track what the National Hurricane Center is looking at as far as the data that's coming in. We'll keep a very close eye on 97L in the hours and days ahead. For the whole team, thanks so much for joining us. To all the hashtag comments and all the viewers joining us here on Tracking the Tropics, appreciate it. We'll see you next Wednesday or sooner here on Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.